The rain hammered against the cracked pavement like 1,000 desperate fists, each drop a reminder that the world could be cruel and cold. Rochelle Johnson pressed her back against the brick wall of her apartment building, clutching her thin jacket closed as the storm tried to rip it from her shoulders. Her clothes were already soaked through from her walk home from the diner, and her feet ached in shoes held together by hope and duct tape. She was about to push through the front door when she heard it. A small, rattling cough that sounded like death itself trying to crawl out of a child's chest. She turned slowly, water streaming down her face, and saw them. A man crouched on the ground, his arms wrapped around a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The child's lips had a blue tint that made Rochelle's heart skip with fear. The girl's body shook with each cough, her small frame convulsing as she struggled to breathe. The man looked up at Rochelle with eyes that held a terror she had never seen before. Not the fear of losing money or status. The fear of watching your child die in your arms while the world walked past. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please help us. My daughter, she can't breathe right. I don't know what to do." Rochelle didn't hesitate. She had $32 in her purse, half a loaf of bread in her apartment, and rent due in 3 days. She was one missed shift away from homelessness herself. But she looked at that little girl, at those blue lips and that rattling cough, and knew that none of that mattered. Kindness didn't do math. Love didn't check your bank account before showing up. "Come with me," Rochelle said, already moving toward the door. "Right now. Come on." The man struggled to stand, lifting the little girl in his arms. She was limp, her head rolling against his shoulder. Rochelle could see the fever radiating off the child's skin even from 3 feet away. She grabbed the man's elbow and guided them through the door, up the stairs that smelled like mildew and broken dreams, and into her tiny studio apartment on the 3rd floor. The apartment was small enough that you could touch all 4 walls from the center of the room. A narrow bed sat in one corner, a hot plate and mini fridge in another. A small bathroom with a door that didn't quite close completed the space. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry, and right now that was everything. "Put her on the bed," Rochelle commanded, already grabbing towels from the bathroom. "We need to get her dry and warm." "What's her name?" "Grace," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "Her name is Grace. And I'm Harrison." Rochelle nodded, wrapping Grace in a towel and gently drying her hair. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale a struggle. "Grace, sweetie, you're safe now," Rochelle said softly. "I'm Rochelle. We're going to take care of you." Harrison stood frozen, water pooling at his feet, watching the stranger tend to his daughter with hands that moved with purpose and care. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but Rochelle was already moving. "Take off your wet clothes," she said, tossing him a dry blanket. "There's a bathroom right there. Get into something dry. I have some old sweatpants that might fit you." She paused, looking at him directly. "How long has she been sick?" 3 days, Harrison admitted, his voice cracking. "It started as a cold, but it got worse. We've been running, trying to find somewhere safe, and I couldn't get her to a hospital. I couldn't risk it." Rochelle frowned but didn't ask the obvious questions. Why couldn't he go to a hospital? What were they running from? None of that mattered right now. Grace's breathing was getting worse. "She needs medicine," Rochelle said, already calculating what she had. "I have some fever reducer. And I'm going to make her honey tea with lemon. It will help her throat and lungs." She moved to the hot plate and set water to boil, then dug through her small cabinet until she found the bottle of fever reducer she kept for emergencies. She measured out the correct dose for a child Grace's size, mixed it with a little water, and gently lifted Grace's head. "Sweetie, I need you to drink this for me," Rochelle cooed. "I know you don't feel good, but this will help. Just a little sip." Grace's eyes opened slightly, and she tried to push the medicine away. But Rochelle was patient, persistent, talking to her in that soft voice until Grace finally swallowed the medicine. Harrison watched from the bathroom doorway, now wearing Rochelle's oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. "You don't know us," Harrison said quietly. "Why are you doing this?" Rochelle looked up at him, still holding Grace against her chest, rocking her gently. "Because she's sick and you needed help. That's all the reason anyone should ever need." Harrison felt something crack inside his chest. In his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, everything came with a price. Every kindness had an invoice. Every gesture of goodwill was really a negotiation tactic. But this woman, who clearly had nothing, was giving everything without asking a single question about who he was or what she would get in return. The water boiled, and Rochelle carefully laid Grace back on the bed, tucking the blanket around her. She made the honey tea, letting it cool to a safe temperature, and then brought it to Grace. "Just tiny sips," Rochelle instructed. "This will make your throat feel better." Grace managed a few small sips before her eyes closed again. Rochelle checked her forehead. Still burning hot, but maybe not quite as bad as before. She looked at Harrison. "Sit," she said, pointing to the only chair in the room. "You look like you're about to fall over." Harrison obeyed, sinking into the chair. He couldn't remember the last time someone had told him what to do, and he couldn't remember the last time it felt like care instead of demands. "When did you last eat?" Rochelle asked. "Yesterday morning," Harrison admitted. "Maybe. I've lost track." Rochelle nodded and went to her tiny fridge. She pulled out the eggs she'd been saving for her own breakfast, the cheese she'd splurged on last week, and the half loaf of bread. She cracked the eggs into a pan, scrambled them with a fork, and made 2 sandwiches. One for Harrison and one that she split in half, keeping the smaller portion for herself. "Eat," she said, handing him the plate. "You can't take care of her if you collapse." Harrison took the sandwich with shaking hands. The first bite was the best thing he'd ever tasted, better than any 5-star meal he'd ever had. Because it came from someone who needed it more than he did and gave it anyway. They ate in silence, both of them watching Grace breathe. Each breath was still a struggle, but she seemed to be resting more peacefully now. The medicine was working at least a little. "Thank you," Harrison finally said. "You don't know what this means." Rochelle shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. She's still very sick. We need to watch her through the night. If she gets worse, we're going to the emergency room no matter what you're running from." Harrison nodded. He understood. Grace's life came first. Everything else was just details. The storm outside continued to rage, rain pelting the windows, thunder rolling across the sky. But inside that tiny apartment there was warmth. There was kindness. There was a woman who had nothing, sharing everything with strangers who desperately needed it. Harrison looked at Rochelle, really looked at her for the first time. She was beautiful, with dark skin that glowed even in the dim light of the apartment, eyes that held both weariness and hope, and a strength in her shoulders that spoke of carrying weight she shouldn't have had to bear alone. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a waitress uniform with a name tag that read Rochelle, in cheerful letters that seemed to mock the exhaustion in her posture. "Why were you out in the storm?" Harrison asked. "Work," Rochelle said simply. "I worked double shifts at the diner on 10th Street. 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then 4 until midnight. Today was my long day." Harrison did the math. She'd been on her feet for nearly 16 hours, and she'd just given him her food and her bed. "Where will you sleep?" "The floor is fine," Rochelle said, already pulling a thin blanket from the closet. "I've slept in worse places." "No," Harrison said firmly. "Grace and I will take the floor. You take the bed." Rochelle looked at him, saw the determination in his face, and smiled slightly. "We'll both take the floor then. Grace needs the bed, and neither of us is going to sleep much tonight anyway. We need to watch her." And so they did. Rochelle and Harrison sat on the floor, backs against the wall, taking turns checking Grace's fever, giving her sips of water and listening to her breathe. The hours stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity, each breath Grace took a small victory. Around 3 in the morning, Grace's fever finally broke. Her breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The blue tint faded from her lips. Harrison sagged with relief, tears streaming down his face. "She's going to be okay," Rochelle whispered. "The worst is over." Harrison turned to her, this stranger who had saved his daughter's life, and he wanted to tell her everything. About who he was. About the billions in his bank account. About how he could repay her 1,000 times over for what she'd done. But he stayed silent because he knew that for Rochelle, none of that mattered. She hadn't saved Grace for a reward. She'd done it because it was right. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Harrison said instead. Rochelle shook her head. "You don't need to repay kindness. You just need to pass it on when you can." As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Grace stirred and opened her eyes. For the first time in days they were clear and focused. "Daddy?" she whispered. Harrison was at her side in an instant, taking her small hand in his. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Grace looked around the unfamiliar room, her eyes landing on Rochelle. "Who's that?" "That's Rochelle," Harrison said softly. "She's the angel who saved your life. Could you imagine turning away a sick child because helping would be inconvenient?" Rochelle didn't even think twice. If this story moves you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever helped a stranger in need? What would you have done in Rochelle's place? Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Rochelle's apartment, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Grace was still sleeping, but her breathing was steady now, no longer that terrible rattling sound that had filled the night. Harrison sat at the small table, watching his daughter with eyes that hadn't closed in nearly 48 hours. Rochelle stood at the hot plate, making oatmeal from the last of her supplies. "She looks better," Rochelle said, stirring the pot. "Much better. That's good." Harrison nodded, unable to take his eyes off Grace. "I thought I was going to lose her last night. When we were out in that rain and she just kept getting worse, I thought that was it. That I'd failed her." Rochelle divided the oatmeal into 2 bowls, setting one in front of Harrison. "You didn't fail her. You found help. That takes courage, especially when you're scared." Harrison looked at the oatmeal. He knew this was probably the last of Rochelle's food. She'd given him her bed, her blankets, her medicine, her meals. And she still didn't know who he was or why they were running. He needed to tell her something, at least part of the truth. "I need to explain," Harrison said slowly. "You deserve to know why we're in this situation." Rochelle sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around her own bowl. "You don't owe me explanations. But if you want to share, I'll listen." Harrison took a breath. "Grace's mother died 2 years ago. Cancer. It was just the 2 of us after that, and I thought I was doing okay. I thought I was keeping her safe. But then I discovered that someone I trusted, someone I worked with very closely, was doing illegal things. Stealing money, making dangerous deals. When I found out, I confronted him." He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. "He threatened Grace. Said if I reported him, he would make sure something happened to my daughter. I went to pull together evidence to turn him in safely, but he found out. He sent people after us. So I grabbed Grace and I ran." Rochelle listened quietly, her face serious. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "He has connections," Harrison said, which was true enough. "I needed to get Grace somewhere safe first, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. I withdrew cash so I couldn't be tracked, and we've been moving around for almost a week. But Grace got sick and I couldn't keep dragging her around in the cold and rain. I was desperate when I saw you last night." "And now?" Rochelle asked. "Now I need to make some calls," Harrison said. "There are people I trust who can help, but I need a safe place for Grace while I handle this. I know I have no right to ask, but could we stay here? Just for a few more days? I can pay you." Rochelle held up a hand. "Stop. You don't need to pay me. Of course you can stay. As long as Grace needs to recover, you stay. That's not even a question." Harrison felt that crack in his chest widen. "Rochelle, you barely have enough for yourself. I can see that. I can't take advantage of your kindness." "It's not taking advantage if I'm offering freely," Rochelle said firmly. "Look, I don't have much. You can see that. This apartment is tiny, my food situation is not great, and I work 2 shifts just to keep the lights on. But I have a roof over my head and a warm place to sleep. That's more than you had last night. So you'll stay and we'll figure it out together." Harrison stared at her, trying to understand this woman who operated by rules he'd forgotten existed. In his world, everyone wanted something. Every action had a motive. But Rochelle just wanted to help because helping was right. "At least let me buy groceries," Harrison said. "I have cash. It's the least I can do." Rochelle considered this. Pride warred with practicality. She really did need food, and Grace needed proper nutrition to recover. "Okay," she said finally. "We can go to the store later after Grace wakes up. But I'm buying generic brands, not fancy stuff. We're practical around here." Harrison smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Generic brands sound perfect. They ate their oatmeal in comfortable silence, and then Harrison insisted on cleaning up while Rochelle got ready for work. She emerged from the bathroom wearing a different waitress uniform, this one a blue dress with white trim. "You're going to work?" Harrison asked, surprised. "I have to," Rochelle said, pulling her hair back. "I can't miss shifts. I barely make enough as it is, and missing work means losing money I don't have." "But Grace," Harrison started. "We'll be fine with you watching her," Rochelle finished. "She's past the worst of it. Just keep giving her water and medicine every 4 hours. The bottle is on the counter. Let her sleep as much as she wants. I'll be back at 2. Harrison stood. "Rochelle, I can't let you go to work after being up all night. You must be exhausted." "I'm always exhausted," Rochelle said with a tired smile. "That's just part of life. But bills don't stop because you're tired. Besides, Grace needs medicine and that costs money. So I work." Harrison wanted to tell her right then. Wanted to say that he could pay for the medicine, the rent, the groceries, everything. that he had more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. But something stopped him. Maybe it was fear that she would treat him differently if she knew. Or maybe it was the simple pleasure of being treated like a regular person who needed help instead of Harrison Reed, CEO of Reed Industries. "When you get back," Harrison said carefully, "let me take you to the store. We'll stock up properly." "My treat." Rochelle nodded. "Okay. That would be good. I need to work out a grocery list anyway." She grabbed her bag and headed for the door, then paused. "Harrison, your daughter is safe here. I promise you that." "I know," Harrison said softly. "I knew it the moment you brought us inside." After Rochelle left, Harrison sat beside Grace's bed, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful now, her color returning to normal, her breathing easy. He thought about how close he'd come to losing her, and how this stranger had saved them both. His phone, which he'd kept turned off for days, sat in his pocket like a lead weight. He needed to make calls to set things in motion. But he was afraid that the moment he turned it on, his location would be compromised. His former business partner, Richard Santos, had resources and connections. If Richard found them here, he would put Rochelle in danger. But he couldn't hide forever. At some point, he needed to face this situation head-on. He needed to protect Grace permanently, not just for a few days. And that meant making moves. Harrison waited until almost noon, then carefully powered on his phone. Immediately, it began buzzing with hundreds of messages and missed calls. He ignored them all and dialed a single number. "Harrison." The voice on the other end was sharp with worry. "Where the hell have you been? Everyone's been looking for you." "I need your help, Trevor," Harrison said quietly, glancing at Grace to make sure she was still sleeping. Trevor Marsh was his head of security and one of the few people Harrison trusted completely. "But I need you to listen carefully and not ask too many questions yet." "What's going on?" Richard threatened Grace. "I have evidence of his embezzlement, but I need you to coordinate with my lawyers to handle this carefully. I also need you to have someone watching but not approaching. I'm in a safe place, but I need to make sure it stays safe." Trevor was silent for a moment. "Where are you?" Harrison hesitated, then gave him the address. "But Trevor, no one comes here. No cars, no men in suits, nothing that would draw attention. This neighborhood is low-key and I need it to stay that way. Can you have someone watch from a distance?" "Consider it done," Trevor said. "But Harrison, you need to know that Richard made a move. He tried to access company funds yesterday and got caught. The board called an emergency meeting. We froze everything and the authorities are building a case against him right now." Harrison felt relief wash over him. "So Grace is safe?" "Grace is safe," Trevor confirmed. "Richard is being investigated. But Harrison, you need to come back. The company needs you. The board is in chaos." "I will," Harrison said. "But not yet. A few more days. Grace is sick and she needs to recover first. And there's someone here who helped us, someone I need to make sure is protected." "Understood," Trevor said. "I'll keep this quiet. But Harrison, whatever you're doing, be careful." Harrison ended the call and powered down the phone again. The danger was passing, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. Grace needed to heal. And if he was honest with himself, he needed this too. This small apartment, this simple life, this woman who gave without expecting anything in return. It was teaching him something he'd forgotten. What really mattered. Grace stirred and opened her eyes. "Daddy?" "I'm here, sweetheart," Harrison said, moving to sit beside her on the bed. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Grace whispered. "And thirsty." Harrison got her water, helping her sit up to drink. She managed several sips before lying back down. "Where's the nice lady?" "Rochelle is at work," Harrison said. "But she'll be back soon. She told me to take good care of you until she gets home." "I like her," Grace said softly. "She's pretty and kind. She smells like cookies." Harrison smiled. "She is kind. Very kind. She saved your life, Grace." "Will we stay here?" Grace asked. "I don't want to run anymore, Daddy. I'm tired of running." Harrison felt his heart break a little. "We don't have to run anymore, baby. The bad man can't hurt us now. But I think we might stay here a little longer just until you're all better. Would you like that?" Grace nodded, her eyes already drooping closed again. "I would like that." As Grace drifted back to sleep, Harrison stood and looked around the tiny apartment. By his standards, this place was nothing. The building was run down, the neighborhood rough, the space barely big enough for one person, let alone 3. But it felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. Because home wasn't about square footage or luxury finishes. It was about the people who welcomed you in when you had nowhere else to go. When Rochelle returned at 2 in the afternoon, Harrison was waiting with a list and cash in hand. Ready for that grocery trip? Rochelle looked at Grace, who was sitting up in bed looking much better. Someone's feeling better, she said with a smile. Miss Rochelle, Grace said shyly. Thank you for helping me. Rochelle's face softened, and she sat on the edge of the bed. You're very welcome, sweetheart. I'm so glad you're feeling better. Can you come to the store with us? Grace asked. Daddy said we're buying lots of food. I can do that, Rochelle said, glancing at Harrison. She saw the determination in his eyes and knew that arguing about money would be pointless. He needed to do this, so she would let him. They walked to the corner grocery store, a small mom-and-pop place with prices higher than the big chains but close enough to reach on foot. Harrison pushed the cart while Grace rode in the front, her legs dangling. Rochelle grabbed items with practiced efficiency, always reaching for the generic brands, the discounted meats, the day-old bread. Harrison quietly put back her selections and replaced them with better versions. Fresh bread instead of day-old. Name-brand cereals instead of generic. Quality cuts of meat instead of discount packages. Rochelle noticed but didn't argue. She could see this was important to him. By the time they reached the checkout, the cart was full. The total came to $237. Rochelle's eyes widened. That was more than she usually spent on groceries in a month. Harrison paid in cash without blinking. Harrison, Rochelle said quietly as they walked back to the apartment, bags in hand. That was too much. It wasn't enough, Harrison said simply. Not for what you've done for us. Back at the apartment, they put away the groceries together. The tiny cabinet and fridge couldn't hold everything, so they stacked some items on the counter. For the first time in months, Rochelle's home looked abundant instead of bare. I'm going to make dinner, Rochelle announced. Real dinner. With vegetables and everything. Let me help, Harrison offered. And so they cooked together in that tiny kitchen, bumping into each other in the small space, laughing when Harrison admitted he didn't know how to chop an onion properly. Grace sat at the table, coloring on paper Rochelle had found in a drawer, humming softly to herself. It was the most normal, domestic, perfect afternoon Harrison had experienced in years, and he found himself wishing it would never end. The piece lasted exactly 16 hours. Rochelle woke at 5 in the morning to the sound of Grace crying. Not the fussy cry of a child who wanted attention, but the deep, painful sobs of someone who hurt. She rolled off her makeshift bed on the floor and rushed to the bed where Grace slept. Grace was burning up. Her fever had returned with a vengeance, and her breathing had deteriorated overnight. The rattling was back, worse than before, and her lips had that blue tint again. Harrison was already there, his face pale with terror. This can't be happening, Harrison said, his voice shaking. She was getting better. She was better. Rochelle pressed her hand to Grace's forehead and swore softly. The little girl was easily over 103 degrees. We need to bring her fever down right now. Get me cool water and all the towels you can find. Harrison moved on autopilot, following Rochelle's instructions. She stripped Grace down to her underwear and began sponging her with cool water, talking to her softly the whole time. It's okay, sweetie. We're going to make you feel better. Just hang on. But Grace's fever wouldn't break. They tried everything, cool baths, fever reducer, keeping her hydrated. Nothing worked. By 7 in the morning, Rochelle was on the phone. Tanya, I need you, she said urgently. I have a sick little girl here and she's getting worse. I need a nurse. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Tanya replied without hesitation. Tanya Rodriguez had been Rochelle's friend since high school. They'd grown up in the same rough neighborhood, both of them fighting to make something of themselves. Tanya had become a registered nurse while Rochelle worked her way through whatever jobs she could find. But their friendship had never wavered. True to her word, Tanya arrived 20 minutes later, her nursing bag in hand. She was a short woman with kind eyes and efficient movements. She took one look at Grace and immediately began an examination. How long has she been like this? Tanya asked, listening to Grace's lungs with a stethoscope. She was sick 3 days ago, seemed to improve yesterday, but this morning it came back worse, Harrison explained, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Tanya frowned, moving the stethoscope around Grace's chest. She has fluid in her lungs. This isn't just a cold or flu. She might have pneumonia. She needs antibiotics. I can't take her to a hospital, Harrison said quickly. It's not safe. Tanya looked at him sharply, then at Rochelle, who nodded slightly. Okay, Tanya said slowly. I can get antibiotics, but it's going to cost money. And I need to be clear. If she gets worse, if her oxygen levels drop too low, we're going to the hospital no matter what. Her life comes before whatever you're dealing with. Understood. Understood, Harrison agreed immediately. How much? Rochelle asked, already calculating what she didn't have. For the antibiotics and everything else she'll need? About $300, Tanya said. I can get them through the clinic I work at, but I'll have to pay out of pocket. Rochelle's heart sank. She had maybe $40 left after buying the fever medicine. The groceries Harrison bought yesterday had been generous, but cash was something she didn't have. I'll pay, Harrison said, pulling out his wallet. He counted out $400 in cash. This is for the medicine and for your time. Tanya took the money, studying Harrison. You're the one they're running from? Not anymore, Harrison said. The danger has passed. But Grace is sick and she's my priority. Good answer, Tanya said. She looked at Rochelle. I'll be back in an hour with the medicine. Keep doing what you're doing with the cool compresses. And make her drink even if it's just small sips. After Tanya left, Harrison paced the small apartment like a caged animal. I should have taken her to a hospital from the start. What was I thinking? I put my daughter's life at risk because I was paranoid. You were protecting her, Rochelle said firmly. You did what you thought was right. And she's going to be okay. Tanya is the best nurse I know. We're going to get through this. Harrison stopped pacing and looked at Rochelle. She was exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She had given up her sleep, her food, her comfort, and now she was using her connections and calling in favors for his daughter. A child she'd known for less than 2 days. Why? Harrison asked quietly. Why are you doing all of this for us? Rochelle looked at him, surprised by the question. Because you need help. Because Grace is sick. Because it's the right thing to do. She paused. Harrison, I grew up with nothing. My mama worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, and she still found ways to help the neighbors. She used to tell me that kindness doesn't cost money. It costs heart. And you either have heart or you don't. Your mother sounds like an amazing woman, Harrison said. She was, Rochelle said softly. She died when I was 19. Worked herself to death, literally. Heart attack at 43. But she taught me that the only thing that really matters in this world is how you treat people when they need you most. Harrison felt tears prick his eyes. I'm sorry about your mother. Me too, Rochelle said. Every single day. But I try to live the way she would have wanted. Try to be the kind of person who helps when I can. They sat together on the floor, watching Grace breathe, waiting for Tanya to return. Harrison thought about his own life, about the luxuries and privileges he'd always taken for granted. About how easy it was to forget what really mattered when you were insulated by money and success. Can I tell you something? Harrison said after a long silence. Of course. Before all this happened, before we were running, I thought I had everything figured out. I built a successful company, made more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, gave Grace every material thing she could want. But I forgot to teach her what your mother taught you. I forgot that kindness matters more than wealth. Rochelle smiled sadly. You can still teach her. She's young. And honestly, I think you already know it. You're here, aren't you? You ran to protect her. You're letting a stranger help you instead of trying to handle everything yourself. That takes humility. And humility is the first step to kindness. Before Harrison could respond, Tanya burst back through the door, slightly out of breath. Got it, she said, holding up a pharmacy bag. Antibiotics, a pediatric nebulizer with albuterol for her breathing, more fever reducer, and some probiotics to protect her stomach. We're going full treatment. She immediately set to work, showing Harrison and Rochelle how to use the nebulizer, administering the first dose of antibiotics and rechecking Grace's vitals. Her oxygen is low but not critical. If we can keep her fever down and get these antibiotics working, she should start improving in the next 12 to 24 hours. And if she doesn't? Harrison asked, his voice tight. Then we go to the hospital, Tanya said firmly. No arguments. I know you're worried about safety, but Grace's life is worth more than any risk. Harrison nodded. He knew she was right. Over the next 18 hours, Rochelle and Harrison took turns caring for Grace. Every 4 hours, the nebulizer treatment. Every 6 hours, antibiotics. Constant cool compresses, constant hydration, constant vigilance. Tanya came back twice to check on Grace, refusing payment both times despite Harrison's insistence. Rochelle is my friend, Tanya said simply. I help her, she helps me. That's how it works. By midnight, Grace's fever finally began to drop. By 3 in the morning, her breathing eased. By dawn, she opened her eyes and asked for water in a clear voice. The crisis had passed. Harrison collapsed against the wall, his body shaking with relief. Rochelle sat beside him, equally exhausted. They'd been awake for nearly 48 hours straight. "She's going to be okay," Rochelle whispered. "Thanks to you," Harrison said. "Thanks to you and Tanya. I could never have done this alone." Rochelle rested her head on his shoulder, too tired to think about personal space. "You're not alone. That's the point. None of us have to be alone if we're willing to accept help." Harrison looked down at this remarkable woman who had turned his world upside down in the best possible way. And he realized that somewhere between the first night and this moment, something had shifted. Grace wasn't the only Reed who had been saved. Rochelle had saved him too, from a life where transactions replaced relationships and success measured value instead of heart. "Rochelle," he said softly. She lifted her head to look at him. Their faces were inches apart. "Yes. Thank you. For everything." "You don't have to keep thanking me," Rochelle said, but she smiled when she said it. "I know," Harrison said. "But I'm going to anyway." The news spread through the building faster than Rochelle expected. By the second morning after Grace's fever had broken, neighbors started appearing at her door with offerings. Mrs. Patterson from downstairs arrived first, carrying a container of homemade chicken soup. "I heard you have a sick child here," Mrs. Patterson said. She was 72 years old, with hands twisted by arthritis and a heart bigger than the building. "This soup has healing powers. My grandmother's recipe." Rochelle tried to refuse at first. Mrs. Patterson lived on a fixed income that barely covered her rent and medicine. But the older woman wouldn't hear it. "Don't you dare turn down my soup," Mrs. Patterson said with mock sternness. "I didn't spend 3 hours making it just to have you refuse out of pride. Besides, that little girl needs proper nutrition." Grace, sitting up in bed now, perked up at the mention of soup. "It smells good," she said shyly. Mrs. Patterson's face softened. "Well then, we better get some of this in you right away." She ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to Grace, watching with satisfaction as the little girl ate spoonful after spoonful. Harrison stood awkwardly in the corner, overwhelmed by this gesture from someone he'd never met. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Just make sure that baby gets better. That's all the thanks I need." After Mrs. Patterson left, there was a knock on the door. Jerome Williams from next door stood there, his 2 young children peeking around his legs. Jerome worked construction and struggled to support his kids alone after his wife left. But he held out a bottle of children's fever medicine. "My kids get sick all the time," Jerome said. "I keep extras. Heard you might need this." "Jerome, you should keep that for your own children," Rochelle protested. "I got 3 more bottles," Jerome said with a grin. "Bought them on sale last month. Take it." "Really?" Throughout the day more neighbors appeared. Miss Rosa from across the hall brought fresh bread she'd baked. Young Dante from the second floor, who was studying to be a pharmacist, brought children's vitamins and probiotics, explaining carefully how they would help Grace's recovery. Old Mr. Chin from the first floor shuffled up with a bag of oranges, insisting that vitamin C was essential. Each person who came had so little themselves. But they gave freely, without hesitation, without expectation of repayment. Harrison watched in amazement as this community, this collection of people who struggled every day just to survive, rallied around his daughter. "This doesn't make sense," Harrison said quietly to Rochelle after Mr. Chin left. "These people don't know us. They barely have enough for themselves. Why would they do this?" Rochelle smiled. "Because that's what community means. When you don't have much, you learn that people are more valuable than things. We take care of each other because that's all we have. Each other." Harrison thought about his own building, his luxury penthouse where he'd lived for 5 years. He couldn't name a single neighbor. Couldn't tell you who lived across the hall or what their struggles were. Everyone existed in isolated bubbles of wealth, connected only by their tax brackets. But here, in this rundown building in a forgotten neighborhood, people knew each other, cared about each other, showed up for each other. It was the richest place Harrison had ever been. That evening, Rochelle made dinner using the ingredients people had brought. Chicken soup, fresh bread, oranges cut into sections, and vegetables Mrs. Patterson had included. They ate together at the small table, Grace chattering happily about feeling better, Harrison quiet and thoughtful. "Daddy, can we stay here forever?" Grace asked suddenly. Harrison looked at his daughter, saw the contentment in her face. She'd been through so much in the past week, but she seemed genuinely happy here. Happier than she'd been in months, maybe longer. "We can stay a little while longer," Harrison said carefully. "But sweetie, we have a home to go back to eventually." "But this feels more like home," Grace said with a child's simple honesty. Everyone here is nice. And I like Miss Rochelle. Rochelle's eyes met Harrison's across the table. Something passed between them, something neither was ready to name but both felt. I like you too, Grace, Rochelle said softly. After dinner there was another knock. This time it was Tanya, but she wasn't alone. She'd brought her friend Luis, who owned a small grocery store 3 blocks away. Luis wants to help, Tanya announced. Luis, a stocky man with kind eyes and a thick accent, held out a box. I bring food for the little one. Special food. Good food. My daughter, she was sick too when she was young. I know what is needed. The box contained everything. Crackers, juice boxes, canned soups, pasta, rice, and even some treats like cookies and chocolate. Harrison's throat tightened. Sir, I can pay you for all this, Harrison said. Luis waved him off. No. This is gift. Tanya, she tells me about the little girl. About Rochelle helping. Rochelle, she's good person. She helps my wife when she was sick last year, brings her soup and medicine. Now I help her. This is how it works, yes. Yes, Rochelle said, hugging Luis. Thank you. This means everything. After Luis left, Harrison sat down heavily. I don't understand this. Any of this. In my world, everything has a price. Everything is a transaction. But here people just give. They just help. How is that possible? It's possible because when you have nothing, you understand what really matters, Rochelle explained. Money comes and goes. Jobs come and go. But people? People are what sustain you. These neighbors, they've helped me through some really dark times. When I couldn't pay rent, Mrs. Patterson lent me money she didn't have. When I was sick last winter, Jerome brought me food every day for a week. When my hot plate broke, Miss Rosa let me cook in her apartment for a month. She paused, looking around her small apartment. We're all struggling here. Every single person in this building is one emergency away from disaster. But we survive because we take care of each other. Because we've learned that community is the only real safety net people like us have. Harrison thought about the wealthy friends and colleagues he'd surrounded himself with. The people who attended charity galas and wrote big checks but wouldn't dream of actually helping someone personally. The people who measured their worth in assets and accomplishments instead of relationships and kindness. I've been living wrong, Harrison said quietly. No, Rochelle corrected. You've been living in a different world. But maybe this experience is showing you a different way. Maybe that's the gift in all of this. Grace had fallen asleep during their conversation, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Harrison picked her up gently and carried her to the bed, tucking her in with a tenderness that made Rochelle's heart ache. She's really getting better, Rochelle observed. Because of you, Harrison said. Because of this place. Because of all these people who don't even know us but helped anyway. He turned to face Rochelle fully. I need to tell you something. I need to be honest about who I am. Rochelle tensed slightly. She'd suspected from the beginning that Harrison wasn't telling her everything. The expensive watch he kept hidden, the way he carried himself, the quality of his clothes even though they were dirty. All of it suggested money. Okay, she said simply. Tell me. Harrison took a breath. My full name is Harrison Reed. I'm the CEO of Reed Industries. We do technology manufacturing, employing over 15,000 people. I'm worth about $4 billion. Rochelle blinked. She'd expected him to have money. But billions? That was a different universe entirely. Oh. I didn't tell you because I was afraid, Harrison admitted. Afraid you'd treat me differently. Afraid you'd refuse to help if you knew I could pay my way. Afraid of losing this, whatever this is. He gestured around the small apartment. Rochelle processed this information slowly. So when you said you couldn't go to the hospital because it wasn't safe, you meant because your business partner would find you, not because you couldn't afford it. Yes. And when you gave me $400 for medicine, that was like me giving someone a quarter. Pretty much. Rochelle was quiet for a long moment. Harrison held his breath, waiting for the anger, the accusation of deception. But when she spoke, her voice was calm. Why did you think I would treat you differently? Because everyone does, Harrison said simply. When people know how much money I have, they see dollar signs instead of a person. They want investments or donations or connections. They don't see me. They see my net worth. I don't care about your net worth, Rochelle said. I care that you were a father trying to protect his daughter. I care that you were desperate and needed help. I care that you're a good dad and a decent person. The money doesn't change any of that. Harrison felt something loosen in his chest. You're remarkable. You know that. Rochelle smiled. I'm just a woman doing what she was taught to do. Help when you can. Love when you can. Be kind when you can. That's not remarkable. That's just human. It's both, Harrison said softly. They stood there, looking at each other across the small space, and Harrison realized he was falling. Falling for this woman who lived in a tiny apartment and worked double shifts but had more grace and strength than anyone he'd ever met. Falling for the life she'd shown him, the community she'd welcomed him into, the values she lived every single day. Rochelle, he started, but she held up a hand. One thing at a time, she said gently. Grace needs to recover completely. You need to handle your business situation. We need to figure out what comes next. But for now, let's just be here. In this moment. With these good people. Okay. Okay, Harrison agreed. But he knew deep in his bones that he didn't want this to end. Didn't want to go back to his isolated penthouse and his transactional relationships. He wanted to stay in this tiny apartment with this incredible woman and build something real. Something based on kindness, hope, and love. Grace's recovery progressed rapidly over the next 3 days. The antibiotics worked, her fever stayed down, and her energy returned. She spent her days coloring, playing with the small toys Mrs. Patterson brought from her grandchildren's old collection, and following Rochelle around the apartment whenever she was home. Harrison watched the bond form between his daughter and Rochelle with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. Grace had been withdrawn since her mother's death, rarely smiling, barely playing. But here, in this tiny apartment with Rochelle, she laughed. She sang. She was a child again. On the 4th morning, Harrison woke early and found Rochelle getting ready for work. She moved quietly, trying not to wake Grace, pulling on her blue waitress uniform and tying her hair back. You don't have to keep working double shifts, Harrison said softly from his spot on the floor. I can help with money. You know I can. Rochelle turned to look at him. Harrison, we've talked about this. I appreciate the offer, but I can't just take your money. I need to work. That's how I support myself. But you're exhausted, Harrison pressed. You're running yourself into the ground taking care of us and working 16-hour days. Let me help. Please. Rochelle sat down beside him. I know you want to help. And I understand you have the means. But Harrison, this is my life. These are my choices. I can't just let you pay my bills because it's inconvenient for you to watch me struggle. It's not about inconvenience, Harrison said, frustrated. It's about caring. About wanting to make things easier for someone who's made everything easier for us. I know, Rochelle said gently. But there's a difference between helping and creating dependency. If you start paying my rent, buying me things, supporting me financially, where does it stop? What happens when you leave? I'll be worse off than before because I'll have gotten used to a lifestyle I can't maintain on my own. Harrison understood her point, but it didn't make the watching any easier. He'd built an empire on solving problems, on finding solutions. But Rochelle's pride wasn't a problem to solve. It was a strength to respect. Okay, he said finally. But if there's ever anything you need, anything at all, you'll tell me? Please? I will, Rochelle promised. She stood and grabbed her bag. Grace should sleep for another hour or two. There's oatmeal in the cabinet. I'll be back at 2. After she left, Harrison sat thinking. There had to be a way to help without making Rochelle feel like he was taking over her life. Some gesture that would be meaningful without being overwhelming. Something that honored her independence while acknowledging her incredible kindness. When Grace woke up, they ate breakfast together, and then Harrison made a decision. Grace, sweetie, I need to run some errands. Would you be okay staying with Mrs. Patterson for a couple of hours? Grace nodded eagerly. She loved Mrs. Patterson, who let her help bake cookies and told her stories about growing up in Jamaica. Harrison took Grace downstairs and knocked on Mrs. Patterson's door. The older woman agreed immediately to watch Grace, waving away Harrison's thanks. Then Harrison left the building for the first time since they'd arrived. He'd been afraid to venture out, worried about being recognized or followed. But Tanya had confirmed that Richard Santos was in custody, and Trevor had assured him the threat was over. It was time to face the world again. But first he had something to do. Harrison walked the neighborhood, really seeing it for the first time. The cracked sidewalks, the boarded-up storefronts, the graffiti on the walls. But he also saw the community gardens, the local markets, the people greeting each other by name. This wasn't a dangerous neighborhood. It was a neglected one. A place where good people lived and worked and struggled because the city had forgotten about them. He found a coffee shop with Wi-Fi and set up his laptop. For the next hour he made calls and sent emails. He contacted his accountant, his lawyers, and his real estate manager. He researched, planned, and put things in motion. Then he walked to the bank. He withdrew $5,000 in cash. Not enough to insult Rochelle, but enough to make a real difference. When he returned to the building, he stopped at each neighbor's apartment. To Mrs. Patterson he gave $500. For all the soup and cookies and kindness, he said when she protested. Please. It would mean a lot to me. To Jerome he gave $500. For your kids. Buy them something they need. Or something they just want. Whatever feels right. To Miss Rosa, to Dante, to Mr. Chin, to everyone who had helped them he gave money. Always with the same message, thank you for your kindness. This is just a small token of how much it meant. Some people refused at first. Others cried. But Harrison was persuasive and eventually they all accepted. Not because they needed his money, though most of them did. But because they understood that giving made him feel better, and they were kind enough to allow him that. When Rochelle came home at 2, Harrison was waiting with Grace and a grocery bag full of ingredients. I'm making dinner tonight, Harrison announced. No arguments. Rochelle raised an eyebrow. You're going to cook? Well, I'm going to try, Harrison admitted. Grace is going to help. We're making pasta and salad and garlic bread. It might be terrible, but it will be made with love. Rochelle laughed, and the sound made Harrison's heart skip. Okay then. I'm excited to see this. While Harrison cooked, with Grace's enthusiastic and somewhat messy assistance, Rochelle showered and changed into comfortable clothes. A pair of jeans and a green sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Harrison tried not to stare and failed completely. Dinner was actually pretty good. The pasta was slightly overcooked and the garlic bread a little burned, but it was edible and made with genuine effort. They ate together, laughing at Harrison's cooking mishaps and Grace's stories about baking cookies with Mrs. Patterson. After Grace fell asleep, Harrison and Rochelle sat together on the floor, backs against the wall, shoulders touching. I did something today, Harrison said carefully. Something I hope you won't be mad about. Rochelle tensed slightly. What did you do? I gave money to your neighbors. The ones who helped us. Not huge amounts but enough to make a difference. $500 each. Rochelle was quiet for a long moment. Harrison. I know what you're going to say, Harrison interrupted. That they didn't help us for money. That you can't buy kindness. I know all that. But Rochelle, these people have so little and they gave. So freely. I can't just leave without acknowledging that. I can't just take their generosity and give nothing back. It would feel wrong. Rochelle sighed. I'm not mad. I understand why you did it. And honestly, everyone in this building could use $500. But Harrison, you need to be careful. These people didn't help you because they expected payment. They helped because that's who they are. I know that, Harrison said. That's exactly why I wanted to give them something. Not as payment but as gratitude. There's a difference. Okay, Rochelle said. I can accept that. But please promise me you won't try to solve everyone's problems with money. Life doesn't work that way. I promise, Harrison said. But Rochelle, I want to do something for you too. Please hear me out before you say no. Rochelle looked at him warily. What kind of something? Let me pay off your rent for the next 6 months, Harrison said quickly. Not forever, just 6 months. It would give you breathing room, a chance to save money instead of barely surviving. You could work 1 shift instead of 2. You could rest. You could live instead of just existing. Harrison, that's too much, Rochelle protested. It's not enough, Harrison countered. Rochelle, you saved my daughter's life. You opened your home to strangers. You shared what little you had. You called in favors and sacrificed sleep and worked yourself to exhaustion. 6 months of rent is nothing compared to what you've given us. Nothing. But I didn't do it for payment, Rochelle said, echoing his own words. I know that, Harrison said gently. But please let me do this anyway. Not as payment but as a gift. Because you deserve it. Because you've earned it. Because I care about you and I can't stand watching you struggle when I have the power to help. Rochelle's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? About caring? Yes, Harrison said simply. I do. Grace and I have been here less than a week but already you feel like family. Like home. And I take care of the people I love. The word hung in the air between them. Well, Harrison hadn't meant to say it but now that it was out there he couldn't take it back. Didn't want to take it back. Harrison, Rochelle whispered. You don't have to say anything back, Harrison said quickly. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I needed you to know how I feel. How Grace and I both feel. You've changed our lives, Rochelle. In the best possible way. Rochelle wiped her eyes. You've changed mine too. I was so lonely before you came. Working and struggling and just existing like you said. But these past few days with you and Grace here, I've remembered what it feels like to have family. To have purpose beyond just surviving. So you'll accept my gift? Harrison asked. The rent, Rochelle took a deep breath. Yes. But on one condition. When I'm back on my feet, when I'm stable, I want to pay it forward. Help someone else the way you've helped me. Deal? Harrison said, holding out his hand. Rochelle took it, but instead of shaking, she held on. Their fingers intertwined, and they sat there in the dim light of the small apartment, hands clasped, feeling the weight and wonder of what was growing between them. Thank you, Rochelle said softly. For everything. Thank you, Harrison echoed. For saving us. For showing us what really matters. For being you. They sat together until late into the night, talking about everything and nothing, building a foundation of trust and understanding that would carry them through whatever came next. The next morning, Rochelle woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She sat up from her floor bed, disoriented, and saw Harrison at the hot plate, carefully monitoring a pan. You're cooking again? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. Harrison turned and smiled. Good morning. I figured you deserved breakfast in bed for once. Well, breakfast in apartment anyway. Grace was already awake, sitting at the table with crayons scattered everywhere. Miss Rochelle, look what I drew, she called out, holding up a picture. Rochelle walked over and examined the drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, one with dark skin and one with light skin, both taller than the third small figure in the middle. They were all holding hands and smiling. Above them, Grace had written in wobbly letters, My family. Rochelle's throat tightened. This is beautiful, Grace. Is this us? Grace nodded enthusiastically. That's you and Daddy and me. We're a family now, right? Rochelle looked at Harrison, who had stopped cooking to watch this exchange. His eyes held a question, a hope. Yes, sweetie, Rochelle said softly. We're a family now. Harrison served breakfast, an impressive spread of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh fruit. They ate together, and then Rochelle did something she hadn't done in months. She called the diner and told them she was taking the day off. Are you sure? Harrison asked. I don't want you to lose work because of us. I'm sure, Rochelle said. I've worked every day for the past 3 months straight. I never take days off. They owe me at least one. So they spent the day together, the 3 of them. Harrison wanted to take them somewhere special, but Rochelle suggested something simpler. They walked to the local park, a small green space with worn playground equipment and patchy grass. But Grace loved it, running to the swings and calling for them to push her. Harrison and Rochelle stood on either side of the swing, taking turns pushing Grace higher and higher. The little girl's laughter rang out, pure and joyful, and Harrison couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh like that. Higher, Daddy, Grace called. Higher. I don't know, Harrison teased. You might fly away. Miss Rochelle won't let me fly away, Grace said confidently. She'll catch me. That's right, Rochelle agreed. I'll always catch you. After the swings, they played on the slide, the monkey bars, and the merry-go-round. Grace made friends with other children at the park, inviting them to play, sharing the snacks Rochelle had brought. Harrison watched his daughter navigate friendships with an ease she hadn't shown in 2 years, and he knew Rochelle was responsible for this change. They had lunch at a small taco truck near the park. Nothing fancy, just good food eaten at a picnic table while pigeons hopped around their feet. But it was perfect. It was real. It was the kind of normal, happy day Harrison had thought was lost forever. As they walked back to the apartment, Grace held both their hands, swinging between them. This is the best day ever, she announced. I agree, Harrison said, looking at Rochelle over Grace's head. Me too, Rochelle added. Back at the apartment, Grace settled in for a nap, exhausted from all the playing. Harrison and Rochelle sat together on the floor, a comfortable silence between them. Can I tell you about Grace's mother? Harrison asked suddenly. Rochelle turned to face him. If you want to. Harrison took a breath. Her name was Michelle. We met in college, got married too young probably. But we loved each other, and when Grace came along, everything seemed perfect. Michelle was a good mother, a good wife. She made our house a home. He paused, his hands clasped in his lap. When she got sick, it happened so fast. One day she was fine, the next she was in the hospital with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months later she was gone. Grace was only 4 years old. I'm so sorry, Rochelle said, placing her hand over his. The worst part was watching Grace lose her light, Harrison continued. She used to be so bright, so full of joy, just like she was today. But after Michelle died, she became quiet. Withdrawn. I tried everything. Therapy, activities, trips. Nothing worked. She just existed in this gray space, going through the motions but never really engaging. Grief is hard for children, Rochelle said gently. They don't know how to process it. I know, Harrison said. But watching her today, seeing her play and laugh and just be a kid again, I realized something. She didn't need expensive therapy or fancy trips. She needed what you've given her. Well, stability. A sense of family. Someone who cares without conditions. You give her all those things, Rochelle protested. I try, Harrison said. But I'm not enough. I've been so focused on work, on building the business, on making money that I thought would keep us secure. But Grace didn't need security. She needed connection. She needed what we have here in this tiny apartment with you. Rochelle squeezed his hand. Harrison, you're a good father. You protected your daughter when she was in danger. You ran to keep her safe. You found help when she needed it. That's not nothing. That's everything. But I should have known, Harrison said. Should have known that money couldn't fix everything. That success doesn't mean anything if your child is unhappy. I should have focused less on the company and more on Grace. You're focusing on her now, Rochelle pointed out. That's what matters. You can't change the past, but you can learn from it. And Harrison, you're learning. I can see it in how you interact with her, how you prioritize her needs. You're becoming the father she needs. Harrison looked at Rochelle, this woman who saw him so clearly, who challenged him to be better while accepting who he was. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise, Rochelle laughed. I just know what it's like to struggle, to lose people, to have to figure things out on your own. My mom used to say that pain teaches you things comfort never will. I've had a lot of pain, so I guess I've learned a lot. Tell me about your mother, Harrison said. What was she like? Rochelle smiled, her eyes distant. She was strong. The strongest person I've ever known. She worked as a housekeeper, a cook, whatever job she could find. We were always broke, always behind on bills. But she never complained. She just worked harder, longer, determined to give me a better life than she had. She sounds amazing, Harrison said. She was, Rochelle agreed. But she paid for it with her health. All those hours, all that stress, it wore her down. When she had the heart attack, the doctor said her body had just given out. She was 43 years old and her heart was like that of a 70-year-old. She literally worked herself to death trying to take care of me. That must have been hard, Harrison said softly. It destroyed me, Rochelle admitted. I was 19 in community college trying to make something of myself. When she died, I fell apart. Dropped out of school, couldn't hold a job, barely functioned. It took me 2 years to climb out of that hole. And even now, there are days when I miss her so much it physically hurts. Is that why you work so hard? Harrison asked. To honor her? Rochelle considered this. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just scared of ending up like her, working 3 jobs until my body gives out. I want more than that. I want a life where I'm not constantly struggling, where I can breathe, where I can help others instead of always being the one who needs help. You do help others, Harrison said. You helped us. Because I finally had something to give, Rochelle said. For so long I've been the one drowning, barely keeping my head above water. But when you and Grace showed up, I realized I had enough to share. A roof, food, care. And sharing it made me feel human again. Made me feel valuable. Harrison pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Rochelle leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, just breathing together, finding comfort in each other's presence. Rochelle, Harrison said eventually, I want you to know that what we have, whatever this is, it's real for me. I'm not confused or caught up in gratitude. I see you, the real you. And I'm falling in love with who you are. Rochelle lifted her head to look at him. I'm falling too. But Harrison, we need to be realistic. You have a whole other life to go back to. A company to run. A world I don't belong in. What happens when this bubble bursts? Then we make a new bubble, Harrison said simply. One where we're together. Where Grace has both of us. Where we build something real that isn't based on money or status but on what we feel right here, right now. It sounds too good to be true, Rochelle whispered. It's not, Harrison insisted. It's just good. And we deserve good, don't we? After everything we've both been through? I want to believe that, Rochelle said. Then believe it, Harrison urged. Believe in us. Believe in this. Believe that kindness and hope and love really can lead to something beautiful. Rochelle looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity there, the hope, the love. And she made a choice. To trust. To believe. To hope. Okay, she said. I believe. Harrison smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Then he did something he'd been wanting to do since that first night. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. I've wanted to do that for days, Harrison admitted. I'm glad you finally did, Rochelle said. They sat together until Grace woke up, holding hands, talking about their hopes and dreams and plans. And in that moment, everything felt possible. Everything felt right. Because they had found something rare. Something precious. Something worth fighting for. The peaceful days couldn't last forever. Harrison knew this intellectually, but he'd allowed himself to sink into the comfort of routine. Wake up with Rochelle and Grace. Make breakfast. Together. Spend days exploring the neighborhood or just enjoying each other's company. Build a life that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. It was on the 7th day that reality intruded. Harrison's phone buzzed early in the morning before anyone else was awake. He'd been keeping it on now, staying in touch with Trevor and his lawyers as they built the case against Richard Santos. But this call was from an unknown number. He answered quietly, stepping into the hallway so he wouldn't wake Rochelle or Grace. Hello? Harrison Reed. The voice was unfamiliar and cold. I have a message for you. Harrison's blood went cold. Who is this? A friend of Richard's. He wants you to know that even from jail he can reach you. He knows where you are. He knows about the woman and your daughter. He wants you to remember that. The line went dead. Harrison stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Richard was in custody. The lawyers had assured him it was over. But clearly Richard still had connections on the outside. People willing to carry out threats. Harrison immediately called Trevor. We have a problem. 10 minutes later, Trevor confirmed Harrison's fears. Richard had made bail the previous day. His lawyers had argued he wasn't a flight risk since his assets were frozen and his passport confiscated. The judge agreed and Richard walked out of jail on a $5 million bond. He's being monitored, Trevor assured him. Ankle bracelet, regular check-ins, the works. He can't leave the city. But he can make calls, Harrison said flatly. He can send messages. Trevor, someone just called me with a threat. They know where I am. I'm sending a security team right now, Trevor said. They'll be there in 20 minutes. Harrison, you need to move locations. Now. I can't, Harrison said, thinking of Rochelle and Grace still sleeping inside. I can't uproot them again. They're finally safe and happy. They're not safe if Richard knows where you are, Trevor countered. Harrison, be reasonable. But Harrison was tired of running. Tired of being afraid. And more than anything, he couldn't bear the thought of taking Grace away from Rochelle, or taking Rochelle away from the only home she had. Send the security team, Harrison said. But I'm not leaving. We'll deal with Richard's threats head-on. When Harrison went back inside, Rochelle was awake, making coffee. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. What happened? Harrison told her everything. About Richard making bail, about the threatening call, about Trevor's recommendation that they move. He watched her process this information, her face growing serious. You should go, Rochelle said finally. You and Grace. If you're in danger here, you need to leave. No, Harrison said firmly. I'm not running anymore. And I'm not leaving you. Harrison, I can take care of myself, Rochelle protested. But Grace shouldn't be in danger because you want to stay. Grace won't be in danger, Harrison promised. I'm bringing in professional security. People who know how to handle threats. We'll be protected here. In this building? Rochelle looked skeptical. Harrison, this neighborhood doesn't exactly have great security. Then we'll make it secure, Harrison said. Rochelle, please. Let me handle this. Let me keep us all safe. I can't leave you. I won't. Rochelle wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his face. And if she was honest with herself, she didn't want them to leave either. The thought of waking up tomorrow without Grace's laughter or Harrison's presence made her chest ache. Okay, she said. But promise me you'll put Grace's safety first. Above everything else. I promise, Harrison said. 20 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the building. Neighbors peeked out their windows, curious and concerned. Harrison went downstairs to meet Trevor, who emerged from the first vehicle with 4 security personnel. Trevor was a compact man in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Harrison, good to see you safe. He surveyed the building with a professional eye. This is going to be challenging to secure. Then find a way, Harrison said. I'm not leaving. Over the next several hours, Trevor's team transformed the building. They installed security cameras at every entrance. They posted guards at the front and back doors. They secured the roof access and verified every resident in the building. Mrs. Patterson was confused but delighted by the sudden attention. Jerome was suspicious until Harrison explained the situation privately. So you're the billionaire everyone's been talking about, Jerome said, crossing his arms. News travels fast, Harrison noted. This is a small building, Jerome replied. People notice when someone gives away thousands of dollars. We're not stupid, Harrison. We knew you had money. We just didn't know how much. Does it matter? Harrison asked. Jerome studied him for a long moment. No. You're still the guy who plays with his daughter. Still the guy who treats Rochelle with respect. Still the guy who thanked us for helping instead of acting like we should be grateful you exist. Money doesn't change character. It just reveals it. Thank you, Harrison said quietly. But Harrison, Jerome continued, if there's danger you need to be straight with us. These are our homes too. We have a right to know if we're at risk. You're right, Harrison agreed. I should have told everyone sooner. I just didn't want to cause alarm. Jerome nodded. Gather everyone tonight. Tell them the truth. Let them decide if they want extra security or if they want to stay somewhere else for a while. But give them the choice. So that evening, Harrison called a building meeting in the small common area on the first floor. Every resident came, about 15 people total. Harrison stood in front of them, feeling more nervous than he'd ever felt in a boardroom. Thank you all for coming, he started. I need to be honest with you about who I am and why I'm here. He told them everything. About being Harrison Reed, about the billions, about Richard Santos and the embezzlement, about running to protect Grace, about how Rochelle had saved them. He explained about Richard making bail and the threats, about the security he'd brought in. I understand if you're angry that I brought this to your building, Harrison concluded. I understand if you want us to leave. But I want you to know that I've hired round-the-clock security for this building. Not just for us but for everyone. You're all safer now than you were before. There was silence when he finished. Then Mrs. Patterson stood up. Young man, I have a question. Yes, ma'am? Are you going to keep taking care of that little girl? Keep being a good father? Harrison blinked, confused by the question. Of course. And you going to keep treating Rochelle right? Keep respecting her? Always. Then I don't care if you're a billionaire or a bus driver, Mrs. Patterson declared. You're a good man in trouble and good men deserve help. You can stay. One by one the other residents agreed. Miss Rosa, Dante, Mr. Chin, Jerome, everyone. Not one person asked him to leave. But, Jerome added, you're paying for building improvements with all that money you got. This place needs new pipes, new wiring, and a paint job. Harrison laughed, relief flooding through him. Deal. I'll hire contractors tomorrow. After the meeting, Harrison found Rochelle on the stairs, tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong, Rochelle said, wiping her eyes. Everything's right. Did you see that? This whole building just decided to protect you. To stand with you. That's what community is, Harrison. That's what love looks like. Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I'm starting to understand that. Finally. They stood together on the stairs, Grace asleep upstairs, security teams patrolling outside, neighbors going back to their apartments, and Harrison realized something profound. He was safer here in this rundown building with these struggling neighbors than he'd ever been in his luxury penthouse. Because these people cared. These people would fight for each other. These people understood that solidarity was stronger than money could ever be. Thank you, Harrison whispered into Rochelle's hair. For everything. For showing me this. For being you. Thank you for staying, Rochelle whispered back. For choosing us. They went upstairs together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Because they weren't facing it alone anymore. They had each other, they had Grace, and they had an entire community standing with them. And that was more valuable than all the billions in Harrison's bank account. Over the next few days, life in the building transformed. Contractors arrived to fix pipes and rewire electrical systems. Painters covered graffiti and repaired walls. New appliances replaced ancient ones. The building was getting a complete renovation, all paid for by Harrison. But more than the physical changes, something else was happening. Word had spread beyond the building about the billionaire staying in the neighborhood. Media outlets started sniffing around looking for the story. Trevor managed to keep most of them at bay, but it was only a matter of time before the full truth came out. Rochelle handled it all with grace. She continued working at the diner, despite Harrison's repeated offers to quit. She maintained her routines, her independence, her sense of self. But she also allowed Harrison into her life in ways that terrified and thrilled her. They'd grown closer each day. Stolen kisses when Grace wasn't looking. Long conversations after Grace fell asleep. Plans for a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. On the 10th day everything changed. Harrison received a call from his lawyers. The case against Richard Santos was solid. Evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy had been compiled. The authorities were ready to arrest him again, this time without the possibility of bail. But they needed Harrison to come in and give a formal statement. "I have to go back," Harrison told Rochelle that night. "To the city, to my office. I need to do this in person." "I know," Rochelle said, though her heart sank. She'd known this moment would come. Known that eventually the bubble would burst and reality would intrude. "Come with me," Harrison said suddenly. "You and Grace. Come to my office, meet my people. Let me show you that part of my life." Rochelle hesitated. She'd been avoiding thinking about Harrison's real life, his billionaire existence. Here, in her small apartment, they could pretend they were just two normal people falling in love. But out there, in his world, the differences between them would be stark and undeniable. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Rochelle said carefully. "Why not?" Harrison asked. "Because your world is so different from mine," Rochelle admitted. "Harrison, I'm a waitress who works double shifts just to pay rent in a rundown building. You're a billionaire CEO who runs a company worth more than I could earn in 10 lifetimes. Those worlds don't mix." "They can if we want them to," Harrison insisted. "Rochelle, I don't care about those differences. You've shown me what really matters. Now let me show you that my world isn't just boardrooms and dollar signs. Let me show you the people I care about, the work I'm proud of. Please." Rochelle looked at him, saw the hope in his eyes, and couldn't say no. "Okay. We'll come." The next morning, a car arrived to take them into the city. Not the SUVs with security teams, but a regular sedan with a professional driver. Grace was excited, bouncing in her seat, asking endless questions about where they were going. As they drove through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods, Rochelle felt her anxiety grow. The buildings got taller, the cars more expensive, the people more polished. By the time they reached Reed Industries headquarters, a gleaming 60-story tower in the heart of downtown, Rochelle felt completely out of place. "Wow," Grace breathed, pressing her face against the window. "Daddy, is this where you work?" "It is," Harrison said. "Want to see my office?" They entered through the main lobby, a soaring space with marble floors and modern art installations. People in expensive suits hurried past, many of them doing double takes when they recognized Harrison. Whispers followed them to the private elevator that went straight to the executive floor. When they emerged on the 60th floor, a woman in a sharp navy suit was waiting. She was tall, blonde, and looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. "Harrison," she said with obvious relief. "Thank God you're safe. We've all been so worried." "Amanda," Harrison greeted her warmly. "This is Rochelle Johnson and my daughter, Grace. Rochelle, Amanda Hayes is my executive assistant and someone who keeps this company running while I pretend to be in charge." Amanda laughed and extended her hand to Rochelle. "It's wonderful to meet you. Harrison's told me so much about you." Rochelle shook her hand, feeling acutely aware of her discount store jeans and plain red sweater compared to Amanda's designer outfit. "Nice to meet you too." Amanda led them through the executive suite, pointing out various departments and introducing them to key staff members. Everyone was professional and welcoming, but Rochelle could feel their curiosity. They were trying to figure out who she was and why the famously private Harrison Reed had brought her to the office. Harrison's office was on the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering stunning views of the city. The space was huge, easily 4 times the size of Rochelle's entire apartment. A massive desk dominated one end, while a comfortable seating area with leather couches filled the other. Grace immediately ran to the windows. "Daddy, you can see everything from here." "Pretty cool, right?" Harrison said, joining her. Rochelle stood in the middle of the office, feeling overwhelmed. This was Harrison's real life. This tower, this power, this wealth. How could she possibly fit into this world? "Rochelle?" Harrison appeared at her side, concern in his eyes. "You okay?" "Just taking it all in," Rochelle said, forcing a smile. "It's a lot." Before Harrison could respond, there was a knock on the door. Trevor Marsh entered, followed by 2 other men in suits. "Harrison, the lawyers are here. We need to go over your statement before you meet with the authorities." "Can it wait?" Harrison asked. "Not really," Trevor said. "Richard's lawyers are pushing for another bail hearing. We need to move fast." Harrison looked at Rochelle apologetically. "I'm sorry. This is going to take a few hours. Amanda can show you and Grace around. There's a great cafe on the 20th floor, and the building has a whole floor dedicated to employee amenities. Maybe you could spend some time there?" "Of course," Rochelle said, even though every instinct told her to run. "We'll be fine." Amanda took them on a tour of the building. The 20th floor cafe was more like a high-end restaurant. The employee amenities floor had a gym, a meditation room, a game room, and a full-service salon. Grace was delighted by everything, but Rochelle felt more and more out of place with each passing minute. As they sat in the cafe eating lunch that cost more than Rochelle usually spent on groceries for a week, a young woman in designer clothes stopped by their table. "Excuse me," she said, looking at Rochelle. "You're with Harrison Reed, aren't you? His girlfriend?" Rochelle blinked. "I'm a friend." "Oh." The woman's tone made it clear what she thought of that. "Well, you should know that Harrison is one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. He's had his pick of women. Models, actresses, heiresses. I'm surprised he's interested in someone so ordinary." Amanda stiffened. "Excuse me, that's incredibly rude." The woman shrugged. "I'm just being honest. Harrison moves in certain circles. I'm sure you're a nice person, but you don't belong here." She walked away before anyone could respond. Rochelle felt like she'd been slapped. Grace, oblivious to the subtext, continued eating her pasta. But Amanda reached across the table and took Rochelle's hand. "Don't listen to her," Amanda said fiercely. "Catherine Morris is a bitter woman who's been trying to get Harrison's attention for years. She's jealous." "She's not wrong though," Rochelle said quietly. "I don't belong here. Look at me, Amanda. I'm wearing a $20 sweater and jeans from a thrift store. Everyone here is dressed like they're going to a fashion show. I work at a diner. I live in a tiny apartment in a neighborhood these people probably don't even know exists. So what?" Amanda challenged. "Rochelle, I've worked for Harrison for 8 years. I've seen him date wealthy women, successful women, women who looked perfect on paper. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I've never heard him talk about anyone the way he talks about you." "What does he say?" Rochelle asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "That you saved his life," Amanda said simply. "That you showed him what really matters. That you make Grace laugh again. That you're the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman he's ever met. Those aren't the words of a man who cares about money or status. Those are the words of a man who's in love." Rochelle felt tears prick her eyes. "But what if love isn't enough? What if the reality of our different worlds tears us apart?" "Then you fight for it," Amanda said. "Look, I'm not going to pretend the differences don't exist. They do. You come from different backgrounds, different economic realities. But Rochelle, real love is rare. If you found it with Harrison, don't let fear or insecurity or mean women like Catherine Morris take it away from you. Fight for it." They finished lunch and went back up to Harrison's office. He was still in meetings, so they waited in the seating area. Grace curled up on one of the couches and fell asleep, exhausted from all the excitement. Rochelle stood at the window looking out over the city. From up here, her neighborhood wasn't even visible. It was just part of the sprawling urban landscape, a forgotten corner where people struggled and survived. While up here, in this tower, people made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever seeing the consequences. "Rochelle?" Harrison's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, looking exhausted but relieved. "How did it go?" "It's done," Harrison said. "I gave my statement. The authorities are moving forward with charges. Richard will be arrested again by tonight, and this time there won't be any bail. It's finally over." "That's good," Rochelle said. Harrison crossed the room to join her at the window. "What's wrong? And don't say nothing. I can see it in your face." Rochelle took a breath. "Someone said something today. About how I don't belong in your world. About how you usually date models and actresses and wealthy women. And Harrison, as much as I want to ignore it, she wasn't wrong. I don't belong here." "Yes, you do," Harrison said firmly. "Because I want you here. Because you're important to me. Because none of this," he gestured at the office, the view, the tower, "means anything if I can't share it with someone who makes me want to be better." "But it's not just about wanting," Rochelle argued. "It's about reality. Harrison, I saw your building today. I met your people. I understand now just how different our worlds are. And I'm scared that eventually, that difference will matter more than what we feel." Harrison took her hands in his. "Rochelle, listen to me. I've dated wealthy women. I've been with people who looked perfect on paper, who fit into my world seamlessly. And every single one of those relationships was empty. Because they were based on compatibility of lifestyle, not compatibility of values. They wanted the money, the status, the access. They didn't want me." He paused, his grip on her hands tightening. "But you didn't know who I was, and you still helped us. You shared what little you had. You worked yourself to exhaustion to take care of my daughter. You showed me kindness when you had every reason not to. That's real. That matters. And I would give up every dollar, every building, every bit of status if it meant keeping you in my life. You don't mean that, Rochelle whispered. I do, Harrison insisted. Rochelle, I love you. I'm in love with you. And I don't care what anyone thinks about our different backgrounds. I don't care if you wear $20 sweaters or thrift store jeans. I care that you have a good heart. I care that you make my daughter laugh. I care that you challenge me and inspire me and make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Rochelle felt tears stream down her face. I love you too. God help me, I do. But Harrison, I'm terrified. So am I, Harrison admitted. I'm terrified of losing you. Terrified that you'll decide the differences are too big. Terrified that I'm not good enough for you. Not good enough for me? Rochelle laughed through her tears. Harrison, you're a billionaire CEO. I'm a waitress. You're a woman who saves people, Harrison corrected. Who builds community. Who loves without conditions. That's worth more than all the money in the world. He pulled her close and Rochelle let herself be held. They stood there in his office high above the city, holding on to each other and the promise of what they could build together. So what do we do? Rochelle asked eventually. We take it one day at a time, Harrison said. We figure it out together. We build a life that honors both of our worlds. We don't let fear win. Okay, Rochelle agreed. One day at a time. Behind them, Grace stirred and sat up. Daddy? Miss Rochelle? Can we go home now? Harrison and Rochelle looked at each other and smiled. Home. They both knew Grace meant the tiny apartment in the rundown building. Because that's where they'd found each other. That's where they'd become a family. Yes, sweetie, Harrison said. Let's go home. Are you rooting for Rochelle and Harrison? Can love really bridge the gap between two such different worlds? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to see how this beautiful story ends. The arrest of Richard Santos made headlines. Former CFO of Reed Industries arrested on embezzlement charges, read the newspapers. Harrison held a press conference, explaining what had happened and reassuring investors that the company remained strong. The media was fascinated by the story, especially when rumors began circulating about Harrison's disappearance and where he'd been hiding. Trevor managed to keep Rochelle's name and location out of the press, but the attention was intense. Reporters camped outside Reed Industries headquarters. Stock prices fluctuated. The board demanded meetings and explanations. Through it all, Harrison kept his priorities clear. Every night, he returned to the small apartment in Rochelle's building. Every morning, he woke up on the floor beside her makeshift bed. He made breakfast with Grace, walked her to the small playground, spent his days between business calls and family time. But he also knew things needed to change. The apartment was too small for 3 people long-term. The neighborhood, while safe with security present, wasn't ideal for raising Grace. And Rochelle deserved better than working double shifts at a diner just to survive. 2 weeks after giving his statement to authorities, Harrison made a decision. He called Rochelle into the small kitchen area one evening after Grace fell asleep. I need to talk to you about something important, he said. Rochelle's heart sank. This was it. The moment when Harrison would gently explain that while he cared about her, he needed to go back to his real life. Okay. I want to buy you an apartment, Harrison said. Rochelle blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. What? Not a mansion or anything crazy, Harrison clarified quickly. Just a nice apartment in a good building. 3 bedrooms so Grace can have her own room when she visits. Modern appliances, good security in a safe neighborhood. I've already looked at several options. Harrison, I can't let you buy me an apartment, Rochelle protested. Why not? Because it's too much. Because I need to make my own way. Because accepting something like that would make me dependent on you. Harrison had expected this reaction. What if I bought the building? Rochelle stared at him. What? This building, Harrison clarified. I want to buy it, renovate it properly, make it safe and comfortable for everyone who lives here. I could hire a property management company to run it, set reasonable rents, invest in the community. And you could have a bigger apartment, one that fits our family better. Our family? Rochelle's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Harrison said firmly. Rochelle, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks. But those 2 weeks have changed my life. Grace's life. I don't want to go back to how things were. I want to move forward. With you. But what does that mean exactly? Rochelle asked. It means I want to be with you, Harrison said. Officially. Not just hiding in this apartment but really together. It means I want to support you pursuing whatever dreams you have. If you want to go back to school, I'll pay for it. If you want to start a business, I'll fund it. If you want to keep working at the diner, I'll respect that. But I want you to have choices, Rochelle. I want you to have the freedom to choose what you want instead of being forced into survival mode. Rochelle felt overwhelmed. This is a lot. I know, Harrison acknowledged. And you don't have to answer right now. But Rochelle, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't me trying to buy your affection. This is me investing in our future. In our family. Because I love you and I want to build a life with you. What about Grace? Rochelle asked. What does she think about all this? As if summoned, Grace appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. I think it's a good idea, she said sleepily. Grace, you're supposed to be asleep, Harrison said, but he was smiling. I heard talking, Grace said, climbing onto Rochelle's lap. Daddy's right, Miss Rochelle. We should be a real family. With a nice apartment and rooms for everyone. But we should stay here too because I like Mrs. Patterson and Jerome and everyone. Is that so? Rochelle asked, wrapping her arms around the little girl. Yes, Grace said firmly. And Daddy should marry you. Then you'd be my real mommy. Rochelle's breath caught. Harrison looked equally stunned. Grace, sweetie, Harrison started, but Grace interrupted. I know you were going to ask, Grace said with a child's intuition. You have that look. The same look you had before you asked Mommy Michelle to marry you. I saw the picture. Harrison knelt beside them, taking both Rochelle's and Grace's hands. She's right. I was planning to ask. But I was going to wait, do it properly, give you time. Ask me what? Rochelle said, her heart pounding. Harrison pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring, a single diamond on a gold band. Rochelle Johnson, I know it's fast. I know it seems crazy. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You saved us. You showed us what love really means. You gave us hope when we had none. Will you marry me? Rochelle looked at the ring, at Harrison's hopeful face, at Grace's excited expression. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too much, too impossible. But her heart knew the truth. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Grace squealed with delight. Harrison slipped the ring onto Rochelle's finger and kissed her deeply. When they pulled apart, all three of them were crying happy tears. We're really going to be a family, Grace said wonderingly. We already are, Rochelle said. The wedding will just make it official. The next morning, Harrison announced his intentions to the building residents. He gathered everyone in the common area and explained that he was buying the building and renovating it properly. I'm not raising rents, Harrison clarified. In fact, I'm lowering them to match what they should be for units this size. I'm going to hire a property management company that actually responds to maintenance requests. I'm going to install proper heating and cooling systems. I'm going to make this building what it should be. Why? Jerome asked suspiciously. What do you get out of it? I get to invest in a community that saved my life, Harrison said simply. I get to give back to people who gave to me when they had every reason not to. I get to show my daughter that wealth isn't about accumulation. It's about using what you have to make life better for others. Mrs. Patterson stood up. Young man, are you going to turn this building into some fancy place where we won't feel welcome anymore? Never, Harrison promised. This is your home. I'm just making it better. And I'm asking Rochelle to help me do it right. She knows this community. She knows what you need. She'll make sure the renovations respect who you are and what you've built here. The residents voted unanimously to accept Harrison's offer. Over the next month, while lawyers handled the purchase paperwork, contractors began the real work. New plumbing, new electrical wiring, new windows, new appliances. The building was transformed, but carefully, preserving its character while making it safe and comfortable. Harrison also created something else. A community center on the ground floor with a space for meetings, a small library, computers for residents to use, and a kitchen for communal meals. Rochelle oversaw the design, making sure it reflected what the community needed. This is amazing, Tanya said, touring the nearly finished space. Harrison, you've really done something special here. Rochelle did it, Harrison corrected. I just provided the funding. She provided the vision. As renovations progressed, Harrison and Rochelle planned their wedding. They decided on something small and intimate, right there in the building's community center. Just family and friends, no media circus, no society wedding. Grace was the flower girl, wearing a maroon dress she picked out herself. Harrison also made good on his promise to support Rochelle's dreams. He asked her what she really wanted to do with her life. I want to help people, Rochelle said. I want to work with communities like this one, help them improve their situations. Maybe study social work or community development. Then do it, Harrison encouraged. Enroll in school. I'll take care of everything else. Rochelle enrolled in a community college program, starting part-time while she continued working at the diner. But with the financial pressure off, she was able to reduce her hours and actually focus on her studies. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon, 3 months after that rainy night when Rochelle first found Harrison and Grace outside her building. The community center was decorated simply with flowers from the local market and candles that cast a warm glow. Rochelle wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but she looked beautiful. Harrison wore a suit, but he'd left off the tie at Rochelle's request. I want you to be comfortable, she'd said. I want this to be us, not some formal performance. Grace stood beside them as they exchanged vows, her hand in both of theirs. Mrs. Patterson officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion. Jerome walked Rochelle down the aisle. Tanya was her maid of honor. Every resident of the building attended, along with a few select people from Harrison's company. When Harrison said, I do, his voice was strong and certain. When Rochelle said, I do, tears streamed down her face. They kissed as husband and wife while the room erupted in applause. At the reception, Mrs. Patterson gave a toast. I've lived in this building for 40 years. I've seen people come and go. But I've never seen anything like what these two have built. They've shown us that love doesn't care about money or status. Love cares about character. And these two have more character than anyone I've ever met. To Harrison and Rochelle. To Harrison and Rochelle, everyone echoed. That night, after the reception ended and Grace fell asleep in Mrs. Patterson's care, Harrison and Rochelle returned to their renovated apartment. It was bigger now, properly furnished, with actual bedrooms and modern appliances. But it was still in the same building, still part of the same community. Are you happy? Harrison asked, holding Rochelle in his arms. Happier than I ever thought possible, Rochelle admitted. Harrison, when you walked into my life that night, I thought I was just helping a stranger. I didn't know I was finding my family. Neither did I, Harrison said. But I'm so grateful we did. You've taught me what really matters, Rochelle. You've shown me that kindness and hope and love really can lead to something beautiful. We've shown each other, Rochelle corrected. You've given me opportunities one never dreamed possible. You've supported my dreams and believed in me. You've made me feel valued and loved. You are valued, Harrison said. You are loved. And you always will be. They stood together at the window, looking out over the neighborhood that had brought them together. It was the same view Rochelle had seen every day for years, but now it looked different. Now it looked like home. Real home. The kind built on love and kindness and community. What comes next? Rochelle asked. Everything, Harrison said. We build our life together. We raise Grace together. We help this community together. We face challenges together. We celebrate victories together. Everything. Everything, Rochelle repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. 6 months after the wedding, life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Rochelle was thriving in school, earning straight A's in her community development program. Harrison had reorganized his role at Reed Industries, delegating more responsibility so he could spend more time with family. Grace was enrolled in a good local school, making friends and flourishing. The building had become a model for community-based housing. Harrison's investment had transformed not just the physical structure but the entire dynamic of the neighborhood. Other property owners saw what he'd done and started investing in their buildings too. Small businesses opened on the block. Crime rates dropped. The forgotten neighborhood was being reborn. But Harrison wasn't satisfied with just one building. He'd been thinking bigger, inspired by Rochelle's passion and the community's needs. One evening he gathered everyone in the community center for an announcement. The room was packed with residents, all curious about what Harrison had planned now. Thank you all for coming, Harrison started. When I first came to this neighborhood, I was running from danger, looking for a place to hide. What I found instead was a community that showed me what really matters. You taught me about generosity, kindness, and the power of people caring for each other. He paused, looking at Rochelle, who stood beside him holding Grace's hand. My wife has been working on something with me. A foundation dedicated to supporting communities like this one. The Rochelle Reed Foundation for Community Development. Rochelle's eyes widened. Harrison, you didn't tell me you were going to name it after me. It should be named after you, Harrison said. You're the inspiration. You're the heart of this. You understand these communities in a way I never could. He turned back to the crowd. The foundation will have an initial endowment of $50 million. It will provide grants for community development projects, affordable housing initiatives, small business loans for local entrepreneurs, and scholarships for residents pursuing education. And Rochelle will be running it once she finishes her degree. The room erupted in applause. Rochelle stood there, stunned, tears streaming down her face. Harrison, this is incredible. You're incredible, Harrison said. This is just me helping you do what you were always meant to do. Mrs. Patterson stood up. Can I say something? Of course, Harrison said. I'm 82 years old, Mrs. Patterson began. I've seen a lot in my life. I've seen people with nothing share what they don't have. I've seen people with everything hoard what they don't need. But I've never seen what I'm seeing here. A man who has everything learning from people who have nothing. A woman who has struggled all her life finally getting the chance to thrive. A little girl finding a mother she needed. This isn't just about money or buildings or foundations. This is about family. Real family. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. She smiled at Harrison and Rochelle. You two have built something special. Not just for yourselves but for all of us. And I want you to know that every person in this room considers you family. We're proud of you. We're grateful for you. And we'll always have your back no matter what comes. The room erupted in agreement. People stood, applauding, some crying. Harrison felt his own eyes fill with tears. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not success in business. Not wealth or status. But belonging. Community. Family. After the meeting, Jerome pulled Harrison aside. Can I talk to you for a minute? Of course, Harrison said. Jerome looked uncomfortable. Look, I know I gave you a hard time at first. I was suspicious of your money, your motives. But I was wrong. You've proven yourself over and over. And I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, I've got your back. Thank you, Jerome, Harrison said, genuinely moved. That means more than you know. Also, Jerome continued, I have a business idea. I'm a contractor, as you know. And I've been thinking about starting my own construction company, focused on affordable housing projects. I was wondering if your foundation might be interested in partnering. Harrison smiled. Absolutely. Let's set up a meeting next week and talk details. As Jerome walked away, Harrison realized this was exactly what the foundation should do. Not just give money but invest in people. Support their dreams. Help them build businesses and futures. Over the next year, the foundation grew and thrived. Rochelle hired a small staff, but she remained hands-on, personally reviewing every grant application, visiting every project site. She finished her degree and immediately started a master's program, balancing school, work, and family with a grace that amazed Harrison. Grace was flourishing too. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and talked constantly about how she wanted to help people when she grew up, just like her parents. She'd started a club at school focused on community service, organizing food drives and volunteering events. One night, after Grace had gone to bed, Harrison and Rochelle sat together on the couch in their apartment. It was bigger now, properly furnished, but still in the same building where they'd met. They'd turned down several offers to move to fancier neighborhoods. This was home. Do you ever miss the diner? Harrison asked. Rochelle laughed. Sometimes. Not the exhaustion or the low pay but the people. The regular customers who became friends. The simple routine of it. You could go back if you wanted, Harrison said. I mean, not because you need the money but just because you enjoyed it. Maybe someday, Rochelle said. But right now, I love what I'm doing with the foundation. I get to help people every day, make real differences in real lives. It's everything I ever wanted. She paused, resting her head on his shoulder. Harrison, do you ever regret it? Choosing this life instead of the penthouse and the society parties and all that? Never, Harrison said immediately. Rochelle, I have everything I need right here. You grace this community. The work we're doing together. This is real. This matters. Everything else was just noise. I love you, Rochelle said softly. I love you too, Harrison replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Rochelle spoke again. I'm pregnant. Harrison sat up so fast he almost knocked her over. What? Really? Are you sure? Rochelle nodded, tears and laughter mixing together. I found out yesterday. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you. Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. This is the best news. The absolute best. Grace is going to be so excited. We're going to need a bigger apartment, Rochelle said. We'll figure it out, Harrison said. We always do. The next morning they told Grace, who screamed with joy and immediately started planning everything the baby would need. That evening they told the building residents, who threw an impromptu celebration in the community center. "This building is going to have another baby," Mrs. Patterson announced. "We need to start preparing. Everyone who has baby clothes or equipment, gather them up. Everyone who has advice, write it down. We're all going to help raise this child just like we help each other with everything." And they did. Over the next 8 months the community rallied around Rochelle. Mrs. Patterson knitted blankets. Miss Rosa threw a baby shower. Tanya provided medical advice and support. Jerome built a beautiful crib by hand. Mr. Chin brought traditional remedies for morning sickness. When Rochelle went into labor, half the building went to the hospital with them. Grace held Rochelle's hand while Harrison coached her breathing. And when their son was born healthy and perfect, Grace was the first person besides his parents to hold him. "What are you going to name him?" Grace asked, cradling her baby brother. Harrison and Rochelle looked at each other. They'd been discussing names for months, but one kept coming back. "Hope," Rochelle said. "His name is Hope. Hope William Reed." "Hope," Grace repeated, smiling. "I like that. Because that's what you and Daddy gave me. Hope that everything would be okay." When they brought Hope home from the hospital, the entire building was waiting. Someone had strung up a banner that said, "Welcome home, baby Hope." There were balloons, flowers, and more gifts than they could possibly need. Harrison stood in the middle of the community center, holding his newborn son while Grace clung to his leg and Rochelle beamed beside him. He looked around at all these faces, these people who had become his family. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all for being here, for caring, for being part of our lives. I came to this neighborhood lost and scared, and you gave me everything I needed. You gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave me home." Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes. "We gave you the same thing you gave us. A chance. A community. A family." As the celebration continued, Harrison pulled Rochelle aside for a moment. "Are you happy?" he asked, the same question he'd asked on their wedding night. "So happy I can barely breathe," Rochelle said, smiling through tears. "Harrison, look at our life. Look at our family. Look at what we've built together. This is everything I never let myself dream about. Everything I thought was impossible. It's possible because you made it possible," Harrison said. "Because you chose kindness when it would have been easier to turn away. Because you chose hope when everything seemed hopeless. Because you chose love when you had every reason not to trust. We chose together," Rochelle corrected. "You chose to stay when you could have run. You chose community when you could have isolated. You chose us when you could have had anyone." Harrison kissed her forehead. "Best choice I ever made." They rejoined the celebration, surrounded by the people who had become their family. Grace was showing hope to everyone, explaining that he was the best baby brother in the world. Mrs. Patterson was making predictions about what kind of person Hope would grow up to be. Jerome was already offering to teach him carpentry when he got older. Later that night, after everyone had left and both children were asleep, Harrison and Rochelle stood at the window of their apartment, looking out over the neighborhood. The same view Rochelle had seen for years, but transformed now by love and community and hope. "Do you remember that first night?" Rochelle asked. "When I found you and Grace outside in the rain?" "Every detail," Harrison said. "I was terrified, desperate, certain I was going to lose everything. And then you appeared, like an angel, offering help without asking anything in return." "I was scared too," Rochelle admitted. "Scared of getting involved, scared of not having enough to share. But something told me to help anyway. To trust that kindness matters even when it's inconvenient." "That kindness saved us," Harrison said. "That kindness changed everything." Rochelle leaned into him. "No. That kindness was just the beginning. What saved us, what changed everything was choosing to build something together. Choosing to believe that love could bridge our different worlds. Choosing hope over fear." "Always choose hope," Harrison agreed. "That's what will teach Grace and Hope. That kindness matters. That community matters. That love matters. That these things matter more than money or status or anything else the world tells us to value." "Always choose hope," Rochelle repeated. "I like that. That should be the foundation's motto." They stood together, watching the neighborhood sleep, their children safe and warm behind them, their future stretching out bright and full of possibility. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Who had chosen to build a life based not on wealth or privilege, but on the values that really mattered. Kindness. Hope. Love. And in choosing these things they had found everything they'd ever needed. They had found home. They had found family. they had found forever.